Hi guys, I'm Anita and I'm back with another video. Today it's time for my June wrap-up, all of the books I read in June. I had a really good reading month. I think it's one of the best reading months of the year. I ended up reading 18 books, so that was definitely very good. And yeah, did some changes in my reading, the way I decided what to read over a week. And I think that helped a little bit. We'll see how it goes with July, because I don't think it's gonna be as many, but we'll see. I have 3 weeks vacation, so it could be, but we'll have to see what happens. Anyway, let's get into my statistics of my reading in June. Hopefully this video won't be too long, but if it is really lengthy and you want to jump ahead or something, I will have timestamps in the description box below, so you can jump to a specific book review if you want to, if you don't feel like listening to everyone. Anyway, let's get into my statistics and get on with this video. In total, as I said, I read 18 books, and that means I read 6,363 pages with an average of 334 pages per book. In terms of genres, I read 1 science fiction, 5 were fantasies, 5 were contemporaries, 1 was a thriller, 1 was an urban fantasy, 2 were historicals, and 2 were magical realism, and then I had 1 book that was a mystery. In terms of formatting, I read 2 that were hardcovers, 3 were trade paperbacks, 1 was a mass market, 2 were ebooks, 8 were audios, and 2 were graphic novels. In terms of length, 15 of them were regular novels, 1 of them was a novella, and 2 of them were graphic novels or manga. In terms of age group, 14 of them were adult, 3 of them were middle grades, and 1 was a kid's book. In terms of publication year, I read 1 that was published in the 80s, 8 that were published in the early 2000s. So I read a lot of backlist books, I guess. I read 4 books that were published in 2016, 2 that were published in 2017, 1 was published in 2018, and 1 was published in 2019. I read 1 book that was that was less than 100 pages. I read 2 books between 100 and 199 pages. Then I read 2 books between 200 and 299 pages. I read 9 books between 300 and 309 pages. I read 1 book between 400 and 499 pages. I can't say that today. I read 1 book between 500 and 599 pages, and then I read 2 books between 600 and 699 pages. The shortest book I read over June was Agent in Training by Terri, I think that was her name. This comes in at 60 pages. The longest book I read was Magician by Raymond Feist, which comes in at 681 pages. In terms of my serious reading versus standalone thing, I read 4 standalones and 14 books were serious books. Out of those 14 serious books, I started 6 new ones, so it was a little bad considering I did really well last month. I made progress in 7, so that's good. And I DNF'd 1 series, and then I didn't complete or catch up to any of the series, so that was a little sad. But I will catch up later, I guess. In terms of the rating, I ended up reading 2 books that were 2 stars. 1 book was a 2.5 stars, 2 books were 3.5 stars, 10 books were 4 stars, 1 book was 4.5 stars, and then I read 2 books that were 5 stars. Now let's get into the books that I did read. The first book that I read in June was Agent in Training by Terri. This was a very short novella. I read it for the Summer Romance Book Bingo because it had a cat or a dog on the cover, and this one had a dog on the cover. It follows this girl who is working for the FBI, I guess, as one of those who trains police dogs to help out in investigations. And something happens and it threatens her and her dog, I guess. And yeah, it's a romance thing, but it was very heavily focused on Christian beliefs, and it really ruined it for me. It was only 60 pages, and I think 4 or 5 times she mentioned the fact that as long as she believed in God, she would get out of this. And I was like, that's not how things work, and it really annoyed me. So I ended up I actually gave it 3 stars because I think that apart from that, it was a good story, so it really ruined it, and that was a little sad. The next book that I read was Keep Her Safe by Sophie Hannah. This was another book that I read for my genre TBR project where I read the mysteries at the moment, and I read this one, and it was not a good book either. I've already forgotten what it was actually about. I think it was something to do with twins, and one of them had died, and the parents liked the other, or the main character believed that the parents liked the other twin better than her, but I'm not really sure. And I really never got into this book, and yeah, ended up giving it 2 out of 5 stars, so I don't really recommend it. The next book that I read was Fruits Basket Volume 8 by Natsuki Takaya. I'm really happy I keep reading these. This I had to hand it at a library, so I don't have the physical copy of it any longer, but I enjoyed it. The thing that's difficult about this series is that sometimes there are so many characters, and it can be a little bit hard keeping up with who are the characters and going really fast and really not developing the characters as well as I wanted them to do. And I guess that's one of my issues with this series. There's so many characters, and I'm not really sure who is who and who does what at times, and some of them are really similar, and that's probably something that I have issues with. But I think I ended up giving this 3.5 stars or 3 stars. I'm not really sure. I didn't rate anything. Alien in Training I gave 2.5 stars, and Fruits Basket I gave 3.5 stars. So yeah. The next thing that I finished was Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. This was amazing. It follows this girl called Sanctia. Sanctia is a thief, if you will. She is working for this man collecting things and interesting things, and it's set in a world where items get scribed into believing they are something else, and they can function in a way that they shouldn't be able to. But everything in this city or this world is dependent on scribed items. Like houses are scribed into things, so if it doesn't work, everything will collapse. And I love this book so much. The way that he described the magic system and the world and the characters and his writing, it all really worked so well, and it introduced me to one of my absolute favorite characters, Clef, and I'm really happy about that. I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. It's one of my absolute favorite books of the year, which you know if you've watched my mid-year book freakout tag. So if you haven't, I'll definitely link to that. So yeah, loved this. Highly recommended, 5 stars all the way through. The next book that I finished was Lies, Damned Lies and History by Jodi Taylor. This is book 7 in the Chronicles of St. Mary series. This follows historians traveling in time, and this time around our main character is pregnant, so it definitely puts a little bit of damper on her and makes things a little bit more difficult with her job and traveling in time and all of that. But it was a really fun story as usual, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished was Hot in Hellcat Canyon by Julie Ann Long. I read this for the Summer Romance Book Bingo. It was the group read of the month in June, and I ended up really enjoying this one. It follows a small town called Hellcat Canyon, and we follow this woman who has lived there. She's doing 2 jobs, and she's trying to escape from the world because of things that happened previously in her life with men that treated her really badly. And then one day this man comes into the town. He goes into the diner where she works, and they have a spark of some kind. None of them really pays attention in the diner to who he is, but not long after they find out that he is actually an actor who was very big in an old younger TV for younger audiences. Like, he was the main thing in that. He's had a bit of a difficulty actually getting back into the acting world, and yeah, they fall in love, I guess. They have a romance. It was really fun, and I actually ended up really enjoying the romance. I ended up enjoying both of the characters. I thought they were both pretty well developed, and I really enjoyed it, so I'm definitely interested in reading more by Julie Ann Long in the future, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing that I finished was Magician by Raymond E. Feist. This is the first book in the Rift War saga. This is the combination of the two first books actually. It started out being one book on about 300 to 400 pages, but he wanted to write the first book as the first book 1 and 2 combined. It follows Puck. Puck is a young boy who becomes a magician's apprentice really early on in the story. He also finds out he has a way of communicating with others, and when an alien group of people or whatever comes into their world, he has an important task of trying to communicate with these aliens, and it definitely makes for an interesting story. It also had all of the tropes, like the fantasy tropes of the different different creatures that are in this books, and I'm definitely interested in reading on in the series in the future, but it was a bit of a slow going for me. I think it took some time before it got anywhere, but by the end of it, I'm happy I read it, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing that finished was Romancing Mr. Bridgerton by Julia Quinn. This is book 4 in the Bridgerton series. This one follows Penelope and Colin Bridgerton. Colin Bridgerton is the 3rd oldest of the sons, and we follow Penelope, who is also seen as she's like a spinster age, so she's believed not to getting married to anyone because she's too old, and her mother is depending on her becoming her like servant, not lady's maid or something like that in the future, so that someone could take care of her when she gets old, and she's a little bit scared of that, but it ends up with her obviously striking a romance with Colin Bridgerton. And yeah, there are some of the characters in this that I like more than others. Our female main character in this one wasn't my favorite, but I did enjoy Colin. I thought he was definitely better than Benjamin, and otherwise, I enjoyed this one. We had some answers towards the author. Like, this series is written in a way where every chapter starts out with a newspaper snippet of an author, of a secret author who knows everything that goes on. And in this one, we got answers towards who that was. So I thought that was pretty exciting. And I ended up really enjoying this one and gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So the next thing that I finished was Ottoline and the Yellow Cat. Ottoline and Gul Cat is the Danish title. It is by Chris Riddell. This is a children's book that I read earlier over the month, and I really ended up enjoying it. It follows Ottoline. Ottoline has been living more or less by herself because her parents are traveling the world trying to find different artifacts, and so she is at home and she spends the majority of her time. She has a lot of friends in her house because people comes to work at her house, and she has this little friend called Mr. Markvart, who is from Norway. He was found up in Norway by her parents, and they took him in, and they have become best friends. And we have this yellow cat who has a big part of it, obviously, and then there are some interesting dogs as well. And it's filled with illustrations by Chris Riddell over the book, and it makes for a really fun little book and a quick read. And it's something, every week I enjoy having something that's easy to read, I've found, so hopefully that will be something you'll see more of in the future. I think children's books are so underrated in the world, because you always get a lot of things out of children's books as well. Even if they are aimed for a younger audience, they have a lot of good messages, and I thought that this one had as well, so I really enjoyed it and give it 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing that I finished was Spook's Apprentice, The Last Apprentice, or whatever it calls. The first one is called, in Danish is called The Witch Hunter's Apprentice. Heksejernslæring is the Danish way of saying it. And it was such a quick read. It follows this boy again, who becomes an apprentice. He becomes the Witch Hunter's Apprentice, Spook's Apprentice. And it definitely finds out that it's not as easy as it sounds, but he was destined to be this person because he was the 7th son of the 7th son. And so in tradition, that means that he will become the next, or the last apprentice apparently, And it's Joseph Delaney. It's the first book in a pretty long series, but I really enjoyed it, and it reminded me a little bit of Kenneth Bøgh Andersen, one of my favorite Danish authors that I've read from. And so I'm definitely looking forward to reading on in the series, and I will, next time when I get to the library to check out books, I'll try and get the next one so I can continue. And highly recommend it if you like this a fast-paced adventure fantasy type story, then definitely consider this. It is for, I won't say young adult, I think it's more middle grade, or the transition between middle grade and young adult is probably where I put this, but definitely enjoyed it and will recommend it 4 stars. The next thing that I finished was Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings. It took me a while to get through this book. In Danish it was split into 2 books, which you've probably noticed if you follow me over the past year. Over this year. We have, I had to hand the book in at the library, so I don't have a copy of it. Garion, yes, that's his name. It follows Garion. Garion is a young boy. He, we have thrown into this world, and they have to find out that Garion is an orphan, obviously, because like it's a bit of a trope in fantasy. And he is protected by this woman, or brought up by this woman called Mrs. Pole. That's what she's called in Danish. And one day this magician type person comes into town, who says that they have to leave here. They're pretty much in danger, and they have to take Garion along with them because they need to relocate. And so they go on a traveling adventure, and I enjoyed it. It was not as good as I was hoping it to be, but I did enjoy it, and I'm interested in maybe trying the next book as well and see how that goes. But it is very tropey on the fantasy elements, which is fun, and but also it's written, I don't know if it's super fast. I don't know. I ended up giving it 3 stars, 3.5 stars, I guess, as a whole, so it was okay. The next book that I finished was My Very 90s Romance by Jenny Colgan. This is, I think I said it was a 2019 release because I saw it to be a 2019 release, but I've also seen now that it's actually from 2001, so I'm sorry if I misled you, but it's not from 2019, and so I have to use it for something else. It was supposed to go for my 2019 release, but I've read something else that worked for it, so it's okay. So I'll have to put this in somewhere else, because the only reason I finished this book was because it was supposed to go for my summer romance book bingo, and I absolutely hated my time reading it. I didn't like this one at all. I thought the main character was very judgmental and fatphobic, and there were so many things that just didn't sit well with me in this book, and I ended up giving it 2 out of 5 stars. And the next one I finished was The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata. This follows a young girl who is a personal assistant to this man who is known as the Wall of Winnipeg. He doesn't really treat her very well in the beginning, at least, because he is just wants her to do her stuff, and he doesn't want anything to do with her. He doesn't want to love anyone. He doesn't want to have any relationship with anyone because he's afraid of losing them. So he treats her a bit standoffish and not really appreciating her for the things that she does. So when she decides that now she's had the time's up, she doesn't want to do this anymore, she leaves the job, he comes back begging her to come back, and he promises he will try and make things work out better for her. She will get a pay raise, and he will pay off her debt that she has. And because he is supposed to be deported back to Canada, where he's from, his visa is expiring, he actually convinces her to marry him of convenience so that he can stay in the US and sort of like that. So they're in this pretend relationship. So yeah, definitely I ended up really enjoying it. It had a bit of a rough start in my opinion, but I ended up really loving this because Mariana Zapata writes excellent haters to friends to lovers plots. She has a really good transition where you really get to care for these characters, and it's not until like the last 80 the last 20% of the book or something, that it actually evolves into something more than a friendship. Yeah, I really enjoyed it and gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing that I finished was The Devil in Winter by Lisa Kleypas. This is the 3rd book in the Wallflower series. It follows Evie. Evie is to be expected to marry her cousin Eustace. I think that Eustace was his name, or Eugene. It was one of those things. And she really doesn't want to, because first, Eustace is a horrible person. Secondly, it's a bit weird. I don't know, it probably wasn't weird back then, but it is weird that she's to marry her cousin. Instead of her ending up in that hole, she finds out that because St. Vincent, who is a lord, is a bit of in a money situation, so he definitely has to find something to save Grace, if you will. So she actually puts up an offer to they could marry, and he would benefit from her money that she can get, and she would benefit because she would not have to marry her cousin, a terrible person. So she decides to do this, and it ends up with them eloping, and they start this relationship that becomes more, obviously, as time progresses. And I ended up really enjoying this one, but I didn't love these characters as much as I loved the 2 from the previous book. I did enjoy it because Lisa Kleypas writes really funny historical fiction, historical romances, I think, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing that I finished was Fullmetal Alchemist Volume 10 by Hiromu Arakawa. This is the 10th volume in the series. It follows these 2 brothers who are state alchemists. I've mentioned it before. They have tried to resurrect their mother from the dead, and they're not by using their alchemy powers, but they're not allowed to do it, so it backfired on them, and this left with one of them losing his arm and his leg, and the other one lost his entire body, and his soul is sort of encaptured in this suit of armor. And they are the youngest state alchemist in the world, and they work for the government trying to solve these different cases. And this is definitely taken a bit of a turn in this one, and I really enjoy where this is going. I can't say much about the plot because it will spoil things. But I enjoy these characters so much, and in this one they were sort of split up and going in different directions to solve things, and it was quite enjoyable, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next thing that I finished was Through the Grinder by Cleo Coyle. This is book 2 in the Coffee House Mystery series. The Coffee House Mystery series is following this woman who's a manager at this coffee shop. She really loves this job that she has, and she has a daughter who's like 18 or 19, maybe. I think she has this 20-year-old daughter, and she finds that her daughter is trying to get into the dating community, and her mother becomes a little bit scared because what if it's not safe, and she wants to check it out for herself, and she ends up actually meeting someone she deems as Mr. Right at this speed dating thing, and they have a date, and afterwards she finds out that he is a suspect in a murder case, not knowing this, but her friend, who is a police officer, comes and tells her that he's actually maybe thinking he might be a murderer. So she decides to take it upon herself to try and figure out, could this be right, and if it's not, who is the actual killer. So she puts a bit of a damper on things, but she decides to see if she can find other clues that will support a different theory than this being her new Mr. Right thing. And it was a fun, really fun story and a really fun mystery, and I end up very much enjoying it. I'm definitely going to be continuing with this series, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next thing that I finished was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. This is a standalone book. It is a 2019 release that came out a couple of months ago. I think it was last month, or maybe it was in May or something. It follows these 2 people. Our main character is Olive. Olive is a twin. Her twin sister was recently married, but at their wedding night, they have a buffet, and it turns out that everyone who eats from this buffet ended up having food poisoning, and Olive had allergies towards something, so she didn't, and she ate something else, as well as her sister's husband's brother, who also didn't eat from it, ended up being the only people who were not sick after the wedding. And because of that, her sister couldn't, it was a non-refundable ticket to on the honeymoon to Hawaii. So she asked her sister if she could go instead of her, because they look very similar, so she could definitely go pass for her. And then she goes on this honeymoon, pretend honeymoon, with her sister's husband's brother, who was also not sick. So they went to this honeymoon thing together, and they had a sort of a haters to lovers thing, and it ended up with a really fun story. It had a bit of a slow start, but I really, really, really liked it in the end, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. And the last and final thing that I finished this month was Fire Touch by Patricia Briggs. This is the 9th book in the Mercy Thompson universe, and this one is probably, it's not my least favorite, but it's not my favorite for sure. I think I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. It had some really great moments, but I missed some things in this one. I didn't think that the plot was as engaging as it usually is. So for that reason, I give it 4.5 stars instead of 5 stars, but I definitely still enjoyed it. As you can tell, I tabbed a lot of things. And I definitely enjoyed it, but it was my favorite thing. And I hope that the next book will do what I wanted to do, and see if it doesn't get back to my favorite thing, get it back to what I think is the best thing about this series, but we'll see what happens. Yes, 4.5 stars, so very happy I read it. So those were all of the things that I read in the past month, or over June. Let me know in the comments down below what you read in June, if you read any of the books that I've read, and what you thought of them. Are you agreeing with any of my thoughts? Yeah, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next video very soon. Bye!